your device, EndoSure, has been trending on social media for quite a while. I've heard quite a number of things about it. A lot of people have questions about your device, how it came about, what's happening, a lot of questions about you personally.
Fantastic. The
Yes,
questions are always good.
very good. So, can you introduce yourself and tell us, just a bit about, your background, what it is you do?
Sure, sure. So my name is Mark Noar. I'm a physician. I went to medical school, graduated, I think, in about 1980. After that, did an internal medicine residency at Beth Israel Hospital, and then went on to do 3 years of internal medicine at the University of Nebraska, and then finally 2 years of a gastroenterology fellowship in the SUNY, SUNY downstate program in New York City, Brooklyn. After that, I was in Germany at the Krankenhaus Eppendorf, where I did a surgical fellowship in surgical endoscopic therapy of the bile duct and the pancreas. Then
Oh,
came back
thank
to the
you.
US and began practicing. And so I've been practicing, had practiced up until just before COVID for 35 years in gastroenterology. And during that time, invented a number of devices. I have multiple publications that I've done. I was at the university for a period of time before going into private practice. And now I am strictly doing work in the field of endometriosis.
Okay, thank you. I remember first time we met, I think it was on LinkedIn, you know, and you told me about your device. You said you have a device, that can diagnose endometriosis, and I was very shocked. I was very excited too because, up until that time, and I'd say even now, we haven't gone very far. I'd say endometriosis is quite, eons behind, where science, medicine now can grow human parts, can clone, can do so many things, but yet cannot get a diagnosis, for endometriosis. And even women's health generally is eons behind, other parts of and other departments of endometriosis. But I'm very curious because you say you are a gastroenterologist. So how did you get into the world of endometriosis?
Well, I think my first introduction to the world of endometriosis is when I was 12 years old. And at that time, I was in what we called junior high school here. It was, I think, eighth grade, ninth grade. And during gym in the wintertime, we had physical exercise in the pool. And I noticed that a particular classmate of mine once a month was not swimming and did not look very happy, who would sit by the side of the pool. So one day we had a quiet moment where I was able to actually walk over and sit next to her. And she looked like she was just in enormous pain. Her name was Wendy. And so I asked her, I said, Wendy, what's wrong? And she turned to me and literally just collapsed into my arms, sobbing because of the amount of pain she was in. And I mean, you're 12 years old. How do you handle something like that? And so I asked her the question. I said, what's wrong? And she said, I have this condition. I think it's endometriosis. My doctors have said that there's nothing they can do for it. It's just part of being a woman, and I'll have to learn to live with it, and it may get better as I get older. And this just struck me as so odd. I was already interested in becoming a physician, and I thought, if I ever have an opportunity in my life to influence this horrible disease that this young woman had, I was going to try and do it. And I really never got the opportunity until much later in my career. And so let's fast forward now to 1998. A fellow gastroenterologist, Dr. John Mathias, publishes a paper in Journal of Fertility and Sterility where he was putting tubes into the nostrils of women for, about 30 hours at a time and measuring the intestinal motility. And what he discovered and reported on was that women with endometriosis have a particular affliction of their bowel. It's a kind of a standing spastic wave pattern. And he found it was only in women with endometriosis. No other disease would do this. Now, this got ignored by the gynecological community until he came to me in 2004 and he said, hey, Mark, look, I've published this in 1998. I think it's something important. You have already invented a device that's on the marketplace that looks at the gastrointestinal motility non-invasively. It's already being used. Can we reinvent that? Can you reinvent this for me so that we can see these really high frequencies? And I said, sure, there's no problem. We can do that. And so I went back to the drawing board. It took about 2 weeks. And all we did was adjust some filters. And now we could suddenly see the frequencies that were unique that he had detected for endometriosis, which are in the 20 to 60 contraction or cycle per minute range. Now, this is just by putting 3 electrodes on the abdomen. And I thought, okay, great. So we've duplicated John's work non-invasively now. But no one's ever looked at these frequencies. No one has ever looked at any of this. And so what we decided to do is we were going to take our time and study this. We're both very active in our practices at the time. And so we studied more than 4,500 people. And I say people because since no one had ever looked at these frequencies, we had to look at men and women, because we had no idea if this was something that was unique to women or maybe it was the same in men. And we looked at women who had all sorts of diseases. So ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, bladder disease, gallbladder disease, liver disease, chronic interstitial cystitis, or bladder infections, or kidney, whatever it was, ovarian problems such as PCOS. We looked at everyone because if we were going to feel confident in this test, we had to be sure there were no confounding illnesses that could confuse us. And in fact, what we found is that gallbladder disease lives in the 12 to 18 cycle per minute range. So we knew that in our analysis, we would have to exclude those ranges because we couldn't have a woman being diagnosed with gallbladder disease thinking it was endometriosis and vice versa. So we did this. This took us 10 years. So we took our time. So in 10 years, we figured out that, yes, this is unique to endometriosis. And along the way, we also figured out what was happening. And so, we're talking about looking at gastrointestinal disease as a reflection of a gynecological disease. How does that happen? So let me just reflect back for a moment. In practice, I saw thousands of young women in their teens, in their 20s, in their 30s, who came to me with abdominal pain and bowel problems. And we would do extensive workups, colonoscopy, upper endoscopy, CAT scans, MRIs, everything you could think of. And yet we could never find anything wrong. And at that moment in time, I realized what we were looking at was endometriosis. Because when I look back through the literature, 86% of women with endometriosis have associated bowel problems. Now, this all came together and kind of clicked for me when John came to me and we started studying this. Because I'd already been seeing thousands of women with endometriosis and sending them back to their gynecologist. And at that time, we realized how confusing the disease was and the fact that women were being ignored and minimized. Basically, even their mothers would say, yes, well, everyone in the family's had that. You'll get used to it. Don't worry over time. But that wasn't good enough, I think, as an answer. So we did the study, and then we decided, okay, let's design a formal study. If you do research work, you must follow certain research protocols. You have to design a proper study. You have to have that study approved by an ethics committee who looks at the study design, who okays it. So in other words, is it properly powered, right? So for a study like ours, we needed a minimum of 90 patients. We had 154, so we were more than adequately powered. We had to have more than 30 in each group. We had 40 plus in each group. So we knew we were adequately powered. So we were approved by ethics to do this multi-center trial. And what we did is we made sure that the surgeons doing the surgery were blinded to the results of the EndoSure test, and the technicians doing the EndoSure test had no idea what the women had wrong with them. So this way there could be no inadvertent prejudice that would take place. So in other words, if a surgeon knew the test was positive, he'd take extra time to make sure he made the diagnosis, as opposed to if he knew the test was negative, maybe he'd spend less time. So we conducted this test. This test took 2 years worth of time, again, done under the ethics committee requirements. So everyone had standard informed consent. And then the other important part is after the test is over, you have to tell people what they had, right? That's another important part of ethical research behavior. And so we did this and we conducted it under STARD guidelines and requirements. Those are standardized guidelines that all researchers should be following. And then we
May I,
decided,
sorry, may I quickly cut you? What ethics committee was this? What country are you talking about?
so we're in the
Where was
United States. The study was done under the Ethics Committee, and in the U.S. we call them IRBs, Investigational Review Board. So this is the Woman's
it?
Hospital of Texas Investigational Review Board. So it's an independent
Okay.
panel that reviews studies, results, and how you conduct your tests.
Oh, great. Thank
Right?
you. Please continue.
Sure. So then we get a chance to look at the results, and the results were very startling. But it turned out that we were able to literally predict, unfortunately or fortunately, we could tell who had endometriosis and who didn't based upon this test. Now that's before you do your statistical analysis. And what was really remarkable is something known as a test for probability, which uses what's called the area under the ROC curve. And so we looked at those numbers, and you want to be as close to 1 as possible, and we were 0.9979, meaning that we're literally in the 99th percentile of accuracy in doing this test. And as it turns out, when we look at the statistics, our sensitivity is 95%, our specificity is 96%, and our predictability, or C statistic, is 99+%, which is to say, if you have this test done and it says you have disease, you will have that disease. And so what do you do then, right? So you do this experiment. Now that's not under real world conditions, right? We're in a specialized hospital, women's hospital center. Most of the women are going to have endometriosis. We're not going out into the general population yet. And so what we do is we go into the general population and we conduct studies in well-known centers. And so we went to a very well-known center on the West Coast, and we did a series of patients over the course of a week, week and a half. And so we looked at 9 women, and 2 of whom were controls, so they were office staff members who we knew didn't have endometriosis. And then we looked at the other 7 who had their tests before surgery. And we didn't know their results, so they had ultrasounds, they had had MRIs. We didn't know whether, I didn't personally know whether they were going to have it, and the technicians who did the study didn't know the results either. And then we went into surgery. I personally was involved in the surgery in every one of these cases. And it turns out that 7 out of 7 that we predicted would have endometriosis did. And what was really interesting is that we generate a value known as a activity index. And we were able to show that the activity index value tracks with the surgical stage that we were observing at the time of surgery. And that was the first time we really understood what we had. Was not only the ability to say, yes or no, you have endometriosis, or we also say how active or how severe your disease is.
Well, interesting. Well, so what next? What did you do with these results?
Well, what next is you put out your you write the article with your co-authors, and then you submit it for publication. And so, just to give you an idea, there's only 18 to 20% of articles submitted that ever get published. So they go through a very rigorous peer review process. So you send this in. The editor first has to feel that it's worthy of being reviewed, and then they call on 3 individual practitioners, usually academic practitioners who are in the field, to please review the paper. And then they go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. And also, I think it's very important for everyone to know, when you publish your research nowadays, they require you to make your database available. So in other words, if the researcher said, hey, I want to do my own statistical analysis on your database, I'm required to provide it to them, or otherwise they won't consider the paper for publication. So a lot of it, this is all very much above board and very much out in the open, which is where it needs to be. It's entirely appropriate. So they did the peer review, and after your peer review, you get asked questions to clarify items, and then you are accepted or rejected. And if the peer review says, no, we don't believe in this paper, no, the data is not good, no, it doesn't make any sense statistically, they reject your paper. And so now we have 2
Right.
papers that have been published on 2 different data sets. showing pretty much the same result. So what do you
Yeah.
do
Can I
next?
cut in? Can I cut
Sure.
you in? This paper that was peer reviewed, for people that want to look at this paper, to review it, where can they find it?
Well, all they would have to do is put in my name and endometriosis and JCM in a search engine. So go to Google or whichever search engine you use, type in Noar, um, endometriosis, and Journal of Clinical Medicine. And
Oh,
then you
great.
will be taken to the Journal of Clinical Medicine. It's an open, what we call an open access article, right? So you don't have
Great.
to pay to see this. I felt it was important. You pay a lot of extra money just so that everyone can see the research rather than the public being restricted from seeing it. And anyone can see this article. In fact, both of the articles are
Great.
done under open access.
Well, great. Well done. Thank you. So, were you saying something? I think I caught you.
So you said, getting back to the topic of what do you do next? So what you do next is you develop a company who can commercialize so that we can get this out there. I mean, the statistics are horrible, right? 8.6 average years from times of symptoms to time of diagnosis. Extensive denial and minimalization. What is it, 10 to 20 office visits before you finally get a diagnosis? I mean, this is just not appropriate. And people starting in their teens start having the problem and they get ignored and then suddenly they have advanced disease in their 20s and 30s and have extensive surgery to hopefully help it temporarily, because we also know that 85% of the time the disease comes back because there is no cure. So you've got to do something. If you have a tool like this, you have to do something. So if we can get to early diagnosis and treatment, one, people will be able to continue with their normal lives because they can get some treatment for it. And maybe, just maybe, with early treatment, we'll be able to prevent disease from going further and have something to do. And another important thing, and this is something else that we discovered, is that if you have surgery and it's removed, we can tell you it's gone. And then typically, a year or so later, a woman will come back to her surgeon and say, my pain is back. I think I have endometriosis. And none of the diagnostic tests work to tell you yes or no, except for this test. So now the surgeon can look at the values from preoperatively to postoperatively and say, wow, your normals are in the normal range. You're still in the normal range. You don't have endo. Instead, you probably have scar tissue, which is a completely different type of surgery. Or maybe you do pelvic floor physiotherapy, which can sometimes work with adhesions. But it gives you the options rather than, okay, we got to go back to surgery, as opposed to the test is positive again, now you go back to surgery.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Where is your device currently? Because I think,
So currently we have approval in multiple countries. The first country that we had approval was in Canada with Health Canada.
oh,
So, and like what I want to emphasize is every time you get an approval in a particular place, you have to go through the same regulatory findings or the same regulatory process. The country will look at your device. Does it work? Is it safe? Is it electrically safe? Will it harm women? Will it harm patients? Will it harm the people doing the test? And are the results accurate? And then they approve your device. So Health Canada is the approving organization, and they give you a certificate, which I had here somewhere, but probably just dropped on the floor.
oh,
And it's the
sorry.
same every. So
Thank.
Health Canada, Brazil,
Uh-huh.
and then after Canada and Brazil, it was leading the way was the UK. Thank goodness. So we have UKAS and MHRA. And you can go to either of the two websites. If you go to the MHRA website, you'll see something like this that will tell you that the device is approved. And if you
Okay.
go to the UKAS website, you'll see something like this that shows you that the device has been approved. And all you
Oh,
have to do is put in the name of the company, 3CPM. And this is the same in every single country. Now, that's just for each and every country. Okay, so Brazil, we're in Israel. We've received Israeli regulatory approval. We are in Saudi Arabia, so we have Saudi approval, Kuwait, Jordan, and we're waiting for the new MDR certificate. So in the EU, you have to have something called CE mark, which has been MDD up until now. That then is over in 2020, and we're all waiting for our new accreditations under the MDR, and we're probably just a few months away from that, so that they'll allow the device to continue in the EU. And so you get a certificate for that. From a regulatory point of view, I think it's kind of interesting. You know, we spend 40% of our time having auditors come on board to make sure that we are manufacturing the devices properly, responding to the people who have complaints, or if there are complaints, always trying to improve things from a quality point of view. And also, they also reevaluate what's your clinical data. So you have to show them the basis for your clinical data, and then you have to show them ongoing clinical data to maintain your certification. So this is a very highly regulated area. To get approved in any country, it's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars and years worth of time.
Interesting. Well done. Thank you for letting us know. And I'm very, happy that people can actually go online, and read, see this reviews and see for themselves. So is your device approved for use by the NHS in the UK?
No, so the NHS, which is the UK's public insurance, has not yet approved this for payment. Now, there are multiple NHS centers that are allowed to use the device. There has been a recent ethics approval for the device to be used and for studies to be done. And so now the NHS will begin the studies that will satisfy them that the device is of help and that it will help to save money and help to save lives, etc. And then they will grant their approval. Typically, somewhere after that, you have to go for something called NICE approval, which is the ultimate. But that's done usually years after something gets to the market. You don't need NICE to be on the market, right, and to be able to sell. You just need UKAS and MHRA. But there are a number of private insurers who are beginning to reimburse for this, I'm being told.
Interesting. How about in the US? What are you doing to introduce your device into the US market?
Well, we initially introduced the device has been cleared in the US since 1998. We in fact have insurance codes with payment. But because of the new indication of endometriosis, we have to do something that's known as a 510K, which is to say we already have a device that's been approved, but now here's a new indication. And so right now we're doing the 510K application, so the FDA will look at the data and then be able to clear the device for the endometriosis indication also. We expect to have that in the next 90 days.
Oh, interesting. Well done. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm about to ask quite a personal question.
Sure.
And I think, yeah, your device, thank you for all the information you've given, and I'm glad that people can go online and, see for themselves, look for themselves. I've used your device, myself in London. Yes, and it confirmed what we, already suspect to be endometriosis. And, yes, the procedure went well. It was 30 minutes, everything, went by the book, just like you said it will. But a lot of people, and, this is online, say, and yes, I've, seen this online, that your license to practice has been suspended in the UK. In the US. And so they want to know how this affects your device. Does this affect your device in any way? And for people that are questioning the efficacy of your device, as against your license, what do you have to say about this?
Well, I think the device needs to be evaluated based upon the device's merits and not based upon individuals who may or may not have been involved in the development of the device. It would be one thing if one could just stand up and say, hey, I have something new, and force it into the marketplace and everyone will believe it and use it. But the reality is that for this device to be approved, it has to go through many regulatory hands. It has to go through many regulatory eyes in order to be approved, and it's done that. So it's not about the individual. And frankly, personal casting aspersions at individuals is never appropriate when you're talking about a device like this one that stands on the verge of saving the lives and livelihoods of millions, hundreds of millions of women.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for, for clearing that. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to add? Is there anything you would like to say to people with endometriosis or suspected endometriosis, especially
Yes.
concerning your device?
Yes, I think the most important thing is that this device allows you to be believed. This device allows you and your employers to understand that when you miss days of work, you actually have a disease that qualifies you to have time off and not to be discriminated against. This device is going to enable the development of new therapies. As it stands now, if you want to develop a new drug, how do you know if it worked? Well, you'd have to do surgery. But surgery is only 50 to 75% effective in making the diagnosis. So this device enables the pharmaceutical companies who have already started approaching us to say, can we use this device to help to develop drugs to know when they're working or not? And again, it's the brilliant work of Dr. David Griffiths there in Swindon, who actually uncovered the fact that you can use the device, the EndoSure test, specifically to find out who will respond to medication, which is just brilliant, especially for the teenagers who everyone's afraid to put on a hormonal therapy, and you can't really do as many investigations that are typically done, and no one will operate on teenagers without really very, very specific disease indicated. And so this really helps in that now you have the test done. Yes, you can have the medication, and yes, we have the expectation you're going to respond. And yes, by the way, if you repeat the study while the patient is on medication, the numbers get better. So we can actually track that the medication's working because the disease activity level goes down. That's the subject of another publication that's coming out soon. So there's really a lot happening. But beyond that, this is something that's going to be done by teenagers. I believe that eventually the NHS is going to have general practitioners doing this test because that's the first place that young women go, and that gives them the chance to be evaluated and then referred up to the consultant appropriately for appropriate care. That's where it's going to happen. That's what's going to happen in Australia, and the same in Brazil. That's what's going to end up happening. Now, I've lost my train of thought. I have to apologize. What were we?
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, we were talking about, you were just talking
The
about the
future,
device.
the future, the future. Yeah. So with regard to the future, this
Yes.
is not going to stay a device that's just in the clinic. We have already begun the studies. I've already invented the next generation. And the next generation will be a wearable.
Oh,
So you will have pain. You will think maybe you have endometriosis. You're 13, 14 years old. You're telling your mom how much pain you've got. She says, all right, let's go down to the apothecary or the grocery store and let's buy one of these devices. We'll take it home. Just put the little Band-Aid on your tummy and coordinate with your cell phone, and it will send the results directly to our servers on the cloud, and then you'll have an answer that'll come back. Now, not only will that provide you with the reassurance of what you have or don't have, which is 95% of the problem, right? 95% is, oh my God, what's wrong with me? No one's listening. And the other 5% is knowing how to deal with it now that you have a diagnosis. But at the same time, imagine if your first visit to the doctor was not, I'm sick, figure out what's wrong with me, and then 20 visits later they say, I don't know, or they find it. And instead you walk in and say, my EndoSure test is positive, I know what's wrong. Let's start working on fixing it. What a difference that would make in everyone's life.
yeah, true. Thank you for that. You mentioned teenagers. Is there an age specificity for your EndoSure? Who can use EndoSure to diagnose endometriosis? What age
So from a
range?
regulatory point of view, the device is approved for women from menarche through postmenopause. So basically, anytime
Oh,
anyone can have the disease. Now, the original device upon which this is based, the EGG, the electrogastrogram, actually is approved for infants until death. They use it on
oh,
babies. Now, obviously, we're not looking for endometriosis in babies, so you can use this device in anyone in whom you suspect endometriosis. They have used it in the positive tests in as young as 9-year-olds.
Good. Interesting.
Some
Oh.
interesting material that's come out that Dr. Matthias did was many of his young women patients who were in their early 30s who were positive had daughters. And so they wanted to have their daughters tested. And some of these daughters were 5 years old. And in fact, you can see evidence of the disease as young as a 5-year-old using this test. They're not
Oh, wow.
symptomatic yet, but they still have the effect on their bowel caused by the disease. You
Wow.
know, that's something we didn't cover, and that is how does this actually work? And that is when you have endometriosis, this is a very cool thing because it's part of the anatomy and physiology of your body. When you have endometriosis, your endometriosis tissue secretes neurotransmitters. It secretes 50 different ones, which is why no one will ever completely understand the disease. But it secretes two in particular. One of them is prostaglandin E2, and the other is prostaglandin F alpha. Now, prostaglandin E2 causes normal contraction of the bowel. Prostaglandin F alpha causes severe spasm. Think like how you feel when you have dysentery, right? And so when you have normal contraction meeting dysentery-like spasm, it creates a standing wave pattern of high energy, and that's what we're sensing. That was the beauty of the discovery. So no matter where your endometriosis tissue is, though, it does this. So if it's in your brain, if it's in your lung, if it's in a joint space, if it's in your spine, it still produces this stuff, which is then carried through the bloodstream to the liver for detoxification. And when it does that, that's when it passes through the small bowel area, and then it activates the small bowel. And that's how we make the diagnosis. Now, what's really miraculous about this is that the half-life, in other words, how long does it take for half of what's secreted by the tissue to be digested by the body? Do you want to take a guess on what that number is?
Mm. I'll just let you tell me.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Oh.
Every 30 seconds, half of
Mhm.
what the endometriosis tissue produces is destroyed. So in other words, in order to continuously have this effect on your body, it's producing constant large amounts of these two prostaglandins. And that is one of the most amazing things behind what's powering all this bowel activity.
Interesting. Wow. So I think in other words, your device supports the theory that endometriosis people, women especially with endometriosis, are born with those lesions with the tissue with endometriosis and not the retrograde thing.
Yeah, so the retrograde thing I think is still viable. Are you born? You're born with the propensity to develop endometriosis, which is to say, if we want to be technical, there's two things I can point out to you and your viewers. One is the estrogen receptors on the cells of the endometriosis tissue are either alpha or beta. Women without endometriosis have alpha estrogen receptors only. Women with endometriosis have beta estrogen receptors only. Now, the difference is that the alpha receptors would be like a factor of 1 stimulated by estrogen. The beta receptors, it's like a factor of 1,000. So they're thousands times more sensitive to estrogen, which makes them go crazy. And the other thing is, how is it that the tissue is allowed to be there if it's abnormal? Because, your body, normally the white cells come by and they clean everything out. And the
Yeah.
difference between an endometriosis patient and a non-endometriosis patient is that the endometriosis cells are covered by specialized receptors known as C47 receptors, CD47 receptors. These are the please don't eat me receptors. So when the white blood cell comes by, it says, oh, you're full of CD47s, we're just going to keep on moving. And so it doesn't digest the tissue, and it can stick around for 30 days, giving itself a chance to develop its own blood supply. Now, what makes it develop its own blood supply are inflammatory conditions. So there's where we start talking about things like the microbiome of the pelvis, the microbiome of the uterus. So that retrograde concept is very important because It's when the bacteria that normally live in the right proportions in your uterus get pushed premenstrually into the pelvis. It sets up these abnormal inflammatory conditions if the bacterial microbiome is abnormal. So if it looks like vaginal bacteria, then that causes inflammation, which stimulates the endometriosis cells to develop a blood supply and to live. But if it's more uterine in its appearance, then the endometriosis cells within 30 days will just go away. They have no stimulus for their blood supply. And that will be a potential treatment in the future to prevent the disease in women at risk.
Mhm. Interesting. So you do not think that endometriosis are rogue cells? Because there's that theory that they are rogue cells.
It's
Um,
all the above. There are
oh,
some people have those cells, particularly look at a man. There are men with endometriosis because they
yes.
have retained Müllerian cells that become endometriosis cells. They don't menstruate, so you can't use retrograde menstruation as a diagnosis in that, right? There are women who similarly have satellites of endometrial cells. In fact, there's a famous endometriosis surgeon in France. His name is Horace Roman. And what he discovered is he would go in and he would find a nodule that was an endometriosis nodule in the bowel. And he would just resect it. But then when they looked under the microscope, there were multiple other nodules extending out for 10, 20 centimeters at a time. Those nodules were probably always there.
Mm.
So some women will already have explants throughout their entire life, and it's just when will they activate. Some women, probably the majority, it's retrograde menstruation. Some will have either lymphatic or venous blood spread. So, the man who coined the term retrograde menstruation was a famous gynecologist. Sampson was his name in the 1920s. But at the same time, he also noted venous and lymphatic spread were also two other mechanisms. So it's multifactorial.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. So with this, I hope everyone that watches, can learn more about your device and can reach out to you if they have any more questions.
Well, and if you're in the UK, certainly reach out to the different centers that are doing it. Again, no one should be suffering. If you think you have endometriosis, in 30 minutes you have an answer, as you yourself have found.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
All right,
Have a
you're
lovely
very
day. It's
welcome.
nice to see you.
It
Thank
was nice
you.
to be.